Active in French politics since the 60s, Jacques Chirac first became Prime Minister of France in 1974. In May of 1995, Chirac won the presidential elections. The French constitution gives the president complete authority over the conduct of French foreign policy. And in this, President Chirac's thrust on Asia is stronger than that of any of his predecessors. As President Chirac arrives in New Delhi as our chief guest at the Republic Day parade, both France and India are counting on the visit to translate the bilateral warmth into concrete measures of cooperation.
Mr. President, as a young man, you were fascinated by India. You studied Sanskrit and you studied Indian civilization. What was it about India that attracted you to that country?
Well, when I was 13, 14, I was fascinated by the Indian civilization, and I wanted to learn Sanskrit. Then I tried with a Russian teacher. But to be frank, it didn't work, and I stopped it, and I learned Russian. And I was very sorry not to be able to...
I think you made the mistake by trying to learn Sanskrit from a Russian.
Well, he was a very good teacher and a specialist.
Right. So the last time you visited India in 1976 when you were the Prime Minister of the country, and Mrs Gandhi was our Prime Minister. What recollection do you have of those years? And how do you remember Mrs Gandhi, for instance?
First, I was very, very glad to be there for the National Day. And with Mrs Gandhi, we've seen the huge parade, military parade, which was really beautiful, whole history of India. Mrs Gandhi, I met her quite a few times. I met her in India before, privately. I met her in France at least 2 or 3 times, and I was very much impressed by Mrs Gandhi. She was somebody with such an authority and a culture and a vision of the world. She was very impressive, and it had always been a great moment for me to speak and meet with Mrs Gandhi.
Did you speak to her in French? She knew French.
Yes, she could speak French. We spoke part in French, part in English, but for the official talks, we always had an interpreter.
When you were there last in 1976, an emergency was on. Mrs Gandhi had declared the emergency. How did you respond to that? Or you don't remember that?
Well, I do remember, but I didn't have to judge that. That was a home problem. Then I couldn't say anything about it. That was the government's problems. So I have great respect for India, which is the largest democracy in the world. And I have no reason to judge what the Indian democracy does. I'm respectful.
Right. So now that you are going to India, you see the big problem in India is absence of infrastructure. One of the things India requires badly are, for instance, nuclear power plants, in which you specialize. Is that on your agenda?
Well, my will is to improve very much the links between 2 main countries in the world which ignore too much from each other. That is the main thing for me, which means I want to develop our political and cultural relations. That is necessary. The economic will follow. Of course, I want to develop also economic relations, and that's why I am coming with all the most important businessmen, French businessmen, to meet the most important Indian businessmen in Bombay. About the infrastructure, France has a good expertise. in various
areas.
Mhm. Including, of course, nuclear plant. In France, as you know, 75% of the power used comes from nuclear plants. We have a very, very good expertise. That is a problem for India, to produce more power. And we are going to talk about that. We are ready to cooperate. But as you know, there is international rules about nuclear plants in the international agency. And France is a member of the international agency and subscribed the international rules. Then we are very much willing to discuss with the Indian authorities how we could cooperate, but in the frame of the rules we have to apply.
Airbus Mirage 2000, these are the other items being talked about. Is that also on the agenda?
Yes, well, everything is on the agenda. I want to speak very friendly, openly about everything. We like to sell Airbuses to India, of course, but we would like also to have a cooperation to build,
joint ventures.
A joint venture to produce airplanes. A few days ago, a few weeks ago, Romano Prodi, who is the Italian Prime Minister, told me about an idea of a 76 plane which could be produced by France, Italy, and India. Why not? Everything is open. We are ready to cooperate. We are not well known in India, and India is not as well known as it should be in France. What I want is to strengthen the links and also to develop our cooperations in all areas.
In September of 1995, France began a series of nuclear tests in the South Pacific beneath the Mururoa atoll in French Polynesia, causing protests around the world. The detonation broke a 3-year international moratorium on nuclear testing and made France the only nation besides China to actively test weapons of mass destruction since 1992. Paris's diplomatic ties with Asian nations and many of its European partners were shaken, and President Chirac has been eager to repair damaged relations with the South Pacific.
I was in Tahiti at the time when you were holding your nuclear tests. I had gone there. You were very unpopular in those days. Why was that particular test so important?
We had a test program which had to be done for us to be sure of the reliability, security of our techniques and our weaponries. And for political reasons, my predecessor stopped before the end. We still had to do 7 or 8 tests which were not done. And that was a pity because we were not sure of what we had and what we were doing after. Then I knew that it wouldn't be very popular, but I decided to not to do new tests, but to end the program of tests, which I have done. And that was in Tahiti, in Polynesia, in French Polynesia.
France France supports the Palestinian claim for an independent state of Palestine. While understanding Israel's desire for security from terrorism, France believes that Israel should adhere to the Land for Peace formula and that Israeli security can only be achieved through the establishment of a Palestinian state.
The Mideast peace process has slowed down, and you seem to have an agenda on the peace process which is different from the Americans.
It's a pity, and it's a great, great injustice and danger to stop the peace process. It can be very, very dangerous for everybody, for both sides. We are sorry about the situation. We try, we European, and mainly we French, try to give a help to revitalize the process in a very close contact with the Americans. We do as much as we can, but it's very difficult to have the Israeli government change even a little on its position, and we are sorry about that.
Because you are very explicit, there should be a Palestinian state, but the Americans are not.
I'm sure that the interest of Israel for peace and security is to have a real government in front of them than a Palestinian state. It's much more secure than to have people you do not know if they have a government, if they are a country or not. Then I am in favor of a state of Palestine.
President Chirac has made a great effort to continue France's interest in the countries which made up its former empire, the vast majority of which are Arab and North African nations. Yet, France seems to be frozen in the face of the horrifying daily slaughter of tens of thousands of civilians in the former French colony of Algeria, just a few hundred miles across the Mediterranean. But with millions of French residents of Algerian origin, France is not indifferent to the violence.
The situation in Algeria is going from bad to worse. Thousands are being massacred. How does that affect you in France?
The world is facing a problem in Algeria, which is a difficult problem because Algerian authorities do not accept any kind of interference in their problems. The European Union decided to send what we call the Troika, which means 3 ministers, to see with the Algerian government if we could help in a way or another, but it's very, very difficult. We are very shocked by the situation over there.
Following the election of a new, more liberal government in Iran, France, along with leading members of the European Union, is favoring the establishment of more constructive relations with Iran. They do not believe that much can be achieved by isolating Iran, which occupies an important position in the Middle East, and that keeping channels of communications open is perhaps the most effective way of fostering changes in that country.
Mr. President, you seem to have an appraisal of Iran which is different from that of the Americans. Now, what is this appraisal? After all, your major company like Total has invested in the oil sector in Iran. Could you explain your policy towards Iran?
It's not only our policy, it's the European Union policy. All our partners in Europe agrees with our point of view. It's never good to ignore somebody. You can have different point of views, but you have to discuss. It's a necessity. And, well, we don't agree with them on most problems, but we keep a relation, and we shall keep it. About Total, that's a private business. And you talked about the American law. American law is American, and we don't care about American law.
President Chirac has been a strong supporter of the European Union and of the single European currency. He believes that in the coming decades, a unified Europe will emerge as the major power center in the world.
So your favorite project is Europe. You are at the heart of it. 1st of January next year, this currency I'm carrying in my pocket will be called the euro. Oh, I could change it into the euro. How will that, what bearing will that have on your relations with us in Asia, for instance? Economic ties.
Europe is already the first economic power in the world. And it can be the first monetary power also. At least we shall have a currency the same strength than dollar. And that is very important for the equilibrium, the balance in the world of the money. The international finance situation will be much better if we have the dollar and euro. And Europe will be much stronger also. Europe will have another change. We are opening Europe and starting now the process to get in the Union all the countries of Eastern Europe. Then Europe will be, within a few years, power with 500 million inhabitants, and this is going to be one of the main poles in the international. You know, the world is going to be composed with a few big poles. The United States, of course, the Mercosur in the South America, which is becoming very, very important, Europe, of course, also the ASEAN, the SAARC, China, Japan, quite a few poles. We had a bipolar world for all the time. That was very dangerous and very bad for everybody. Today we are going towards a multipolar world, and Europe is going to be probably the main pole within 20 or 30 years.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.